Good boy. Fenton. Okay, so I wanted to do a little video about the Podgo today, just because I know there's some people on the channel that have one and use one, and also I guess there might be some other people that are coming to the channel wondering, is this Podgo thing worth it? Now, when it initially came out, it was substantially different to the HX Stomp, and what made it different was a few things, but one of the things was that you've got 4 snapshots. So this would be a really important thing, or an extra additional thing that's useful for gigging, so you can have completely different settings on your amps and pedals. So 4 instances of that. The other thing is that you've got this mode button, so you can quickly switch between these things, so you can have your 4 kind of key snapshots, but then also switch in reverb or whatever you've got here. And it's super useful in that way. Obviously you've got a built-in expression pedal, which by default does volume and wah, and again that's something that's pretty useful, I think. The screen is more than double the size of the HX Stomp, so that's kind of cool. So those are some of the plus points for the Podgo, I think. So if you were potentially going to be gigging the thing and you're not using a pedal board or something like that, I think actually this was a really good idea for gigging musicians who wanted something in the Helix-y HX Stomp world, but didn't want to spend lots of money and wanted something that was actually ready to do pretty much everything without adding additional pedals and stuff. Now, between now and then, they've also brought out the HX Stomp XL, which I think is about £600, something like that. So substantially more expensive than the Podgo, but has kind of this sort of layout where you've got 4 snapshots, you've got quick ways to switch between these modes. So it kind of is doing pretty much the same job as the Podgo without the expression pedal. So that's another thing to look at now, I think, that you didn't have before to consider. And some of the key differences that you've got with the HX Stomp, you've got the command center and MIDI, and you've also got the ability to have path B, or a parallel path, and so you can do things like dual amping, dual cabs, and parallel delays and reverbs and that sort of stuff. So this comes to some of the limitations of the Podgo. So effectively some of these choices here are fixed, so you can only really have a volume pedal here, or stereo width. That's the thing you can do there, by the way, if you didn't already know that. So you could put that at the end of your signal chain. That's something that I've done elsewhere, so you can make use of that volume block for other stuff. You can have any wah there. Then this block here is free, so you can have a distortion block there. You've got a send return, which is always in the chain. You've got an amp, which is always in the chain, although obviously you can bypass these. You've got an EQ, which is always there. You've got a cab, which is always there, or an IR. so you can choose between the two, but no dual cab. And then you've got another 3 slot and another 3 slot, and then I think another 3 slot. So what have we got? I think there's 4 free slots that you can use. If I just go to an empty preset, this is basically a good way to demonstrate what the signal chain is. So these 4 blocks are kind of the leeway that you have to make changes. So it's a semi-fixed signal chain. So although you can move these all around and you've got your choices of all of the Helix stuff, you've only got kind of 4 spots to do that stuff. So, you know, maybe you put a delay at the end, maybe you also chuck a reverb there, and then maybe you put a drive of some form there, and maybe you think about, okay, I could have a mod, some sort of phaser or something, and you can put these any way you like. What do you want? She wants her trousers. Where are they? Yeah, okay, I've got to get a separate studio thing. So anyway, like I say, you can move the position of any of these things. So you can go pretty wild with it if you wanted to. But you don't have complete flexibility. So, worth knowing. One of the things that I've just started doing recently, you know, there was this trick that I talked about, the Heft Trick, this EQ block. I'm using that between the amp and the cab to kind of give a bit of low end heft, is what I'm calling it. So that's something worth trying. And obviously you've got your snapshot, so each of these blocks could do something completely different per snapshot. You can have the settings do whatever you like, so that's worth bearing in mind. And then also you've got high cuts within the cab, which you can switch around per snapshot. So although there is some limitation to what you can do, it's also pretty flexible in other ways, and I think some of those limitations are kind of cool. So I come at the Podgo and think about things slightly differently. You know, I wouldn't normally put a volume pedal in a block, I wouldn't normally put a wah pedal in a block or an EQ, but having them there always to play with is kind of not necessarily a negative. It's just kind of makes me think about things in a different way. In terms of amps and stuff, I think we've got now all of the amps that are in the Helix at the moment, except for the orange, which I guess might come at a later firmware date. But we've got the 2 diesel updates, and we've got the, where is it, the Princeton, so that's really cool. But we didn't get some of the things like the poly sustain, so it looks like at this stage we're going to get some of the updates if CPU or DSP allows, but we're not necessarily going to get all of the updates that Helix and HX Stomp get going forward. So that's something to be aware of. And there are things like, I think, is it the legacy drive, which doesn't work on the Podgo or was never ported over, I think, for DSP reasons. But we did get the Horizon drive. So another thing to consider is that DSP is a slight issue, because although you've got 4 blocks that you can use, those ones that you can't change are always using some DSP. So if you wanted to do something, I don't know, let's try this. I'm going to use some things which I know are fairly DSP intensive. So if we use like a Cali 4 rhythm and a Horizon drive, then I'm going to imagine we're going to have to be fairly brutal about our choices at this end. So you start to see that some of the searchlights or double tank, some of the reverbs we can't get access to. And although we've only made kind of 2-3 choices, we're quite limited on what else we can start to choose. So sometimes you're going to have to make those kind of choices, I guess, about what is really important to your preset. So if it is that you really need to use a Cali 4 or whatever, then you're going to have to make other choices about the kinds of reverbs that you might be able to use. So I think those are the things that I would want to know if I was buying this kind of thing again. You've got this little setting here where you can link the amp and the cab as well. So this is in global preferences. So if you go press these 2 buttons, global preferences and preferences, the link amp and cab. So that will make the kind of automatic adjustment or connection so that each amp that you choose is linked to its kind of optimal cab, if you like, which could be a cool way to kind of build presets a little bit quicker. Another thing to bear in mind, you've got this amp out source where you can tap this amp out setting to be before the cab and IR or after. So if you're going into like a full range flat response speaker, you can use it after so that you've got your delays and reverbs on it. Or you could put a cab at the very end and you go into the cab. I'll just show you. Put the cab at the very end and you'd have your delay and your reverb going out of the amp out, but not the actual cab. So you could go into like a power cab with that, and that would kind of work. In general, I still think this is significantly different enough from an HX Stomp and HX Stomp XL to exist. And actually, I really like the way that this screen kind of looks. And I think it's pretty cool to use. Certainly if I was a kid growing up and I'd had access to one of these, it would have been really fun. But I still think it's also mature enough to certainly gig with. If you got rubbish eyes like me, potentially this kind of screen might be a little bit more usable than the HX Stomp screen, which is substantially smaller, if you can see that. But yeah, so that's kind of my thoughts on the Podgo. If you like the Helix tones and you like the Helix kind of ecosystem, but you wanted something in a package that was smaller, cheaper, less capable, but still capable enough to gig with, then maybe take a look at the Podgo. The HX Stomp I still think is also an amazing piece of kit. The HX Stomp XL maybe takes that HX Stomp into a slightly more giggable unit, but again, you might still need an external pedal with a button and stuff. So this button being set up and switchable by default in every preset, I think saves you quite a lot of work as well, potentially. I don't know. Hopefully that was useful to one person who clicked this video thinking, maybe I want a Podgo. I don't know. Catch you in a bit. If you want to like and subscribe, you could. And also, you can get all of my Podgo presets in the description if you wanted to try them. Some of them might sound alright.